From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
4 days, still New Hampshire. The first primary in the nation kicks off on Tuesday. And of course, we'll be there for you. Candidates and their surrogates are crisscrossing the Granite State today in a final play for Republican and independent votes.
Congress takes a step forward on a deal for business and child tax breaks, moving the bill out of committee with a bipartisan 40-3 vote. We'll discuss it with Rohit Kumar of PwC.
And the U.S. strikes Houthi forces in Yemen now for the fourth time this week, as the administration and the U.K. consider stepping up their campaign against the Iran-backed group. We'll talk about tensions in the region with Hagar Chemali. Kaylee, it's been another interesting day here in the nation's capital, a snow day.
Indeed.
That shut down schools, but not the government. And by
That's
that, we
right.
mean the government is still open and running. Around this time yesterday, Congress got the job done. The president signed the bill today.
The continuing resolution has passed. Most members were able to get out before the snowstorm came. My question is going to be, Joe, are we going to get out of Reagan National Airport tomorrow to head up to Manchester, New Hampshire?
This remains a question. We will get there one way or the other before we're back on the air on Monday. But yeah, the snow is falling here. We expect frigid temps in the nation's capital. Maybe we'll warm up in New Hampshire. Joining us now to get started in New Hampshire is a chilly Tyler Kendall. Zach Cohen is with us as well, and Kate Ackley. Tyler, let's start with you on the ground in New Hampshire. It's closing argument time. What are the candidates up to?
Hey, Joe, I'm here at the Saddle Up Saloon in Kingston, New Hampshire. I'm here at the Saddle Up Saloon in Kingston, New Hampshire, where an event for former President Trump just wrapped up. It's retail campaign season here in New Hampshire, where it's happening in full swing. The top three Republican candidates held 12 events throughout the state today, and 7 of those were for former Governor Nikki Haley. So that's more than half of them. She's really been trying to crisscross the state and meet voters in person as she tries to make this a one-on-one contest with former President Trump. But one thing is for sure, that these candidates are trying to target independent voters here in New Hampshire. They make up the largest percent of the vote here at 39% of the electorate. I've been having the chance to talk to voters throughout the day here. Here's what one independent voter told me about what they're staking this election on.
As the most involved voters of any state in the union. I don't think there's anyone who votes in this state who doesn't have an opinion on something, whether that be Republican, Democrat, or independent. I'm a registered independent, and I will reaffirm my independent status after I vote in the Republican primary.
Now, of course, big news today. Bloomberg News reporting that Senator Tim Scott is expected to endorse former President Trump tonight at a rally in New Hampshire. Joe and Kaylee, as you know, this is considered a blow for Nikki Haley's campaign, who has been trying to court that more moderate lean.
All right, Tyler Kendall, looking chilly in New Hampshire. Looking forward to joining you there tomorrow. Thank you so much. Meanwhile, here in Washington, President Biden today signed the continuing resolution into law that will prevent a partial government shutdown this weekend. But not all matters are solved. And White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says Congress should turn its attention to the president's supplemental budget request.
Instead of wasting more time on partisan appropriation bills that violate the budget agreement 2/3 of them voted for last spring, House Republicans must finally do their jobs and work across the aisle to pass full-year funding bills that deliver for the American people and address urgent domestic and national security priorities by passing the president's supplemental request.
Let's turn now to Zach Cohen of Bloomberg Government. So the supplemental request obviously includes funding for border security, funding for Ukraine as well. House Speaker Mike Johnson barely got this continuing resolution over the line with enough Republican votes. There were more than 100 Republicans who didn't vote to keep the government open with this package. How hard is it going to be to secure votes for something that they may not like in the Ukraine aid?
there really are two big hurdles that this emergency supplemental package needs to get through to help, as you mentioned, Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and of course funding for the southern border first. The Senate's got to come up with this package. Negotiators from the Senate and the White House have been talking for weeks now, trying to come up with some sort of agreement that can satisfy at least majorities of both Democrats and Republicans in the Senate. The key issue then will be once that package gets out of the Senate, if it gets out of the Senate, we could start seeing votes on that next week, is where does that go in the House? There are obviously plenty of members of the House Republican Conference who do not want to see more aid to Ukraine and are going to be skeptical of any sort of negotiation on border security, even though there have been plenty of compromises with Democrats on this issue. So how Mike Johnson is able to square that circle and toe that line is going to be really interesting and will determine where this $110 billion of aid goes.
Could this come down to a trade with Democrats, is what we're hearing, to save Mike Johnson's speakership, if a couple of them would line up to help him fend off a motion to vacate? Because what he's suggesting here, what he may be about to do, is what got Kevin McCarthy fired, and we've been down this road before.
We have heard our colleagues have talked to Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Republican from Georgia, who has said if Speaker Mike Johnson brings up aid for Ukraine in any sort of package, even if it's with significant concessions on border security that Republicans have been calling for, that she would file a motion to vacate. Now, she would need a handful of Republicans, as well as all Democrats, to support her on that effort to actually oust Johnson from the speakership. It seems like something that even Johnson wouldn't want to go for. Now, that some Democrats have talked about, maybe supporting him on that motion to vacate as a trade for this broader supplemental package. But if Democrats ended up supporting Johnson on something like that, eventually he would have a revolt from Republicans anyway, and make it much more difficult to govern for the rest of the year, at least as long as Republicans have the majority.
Zach, thanks for being with us. Zach Cohen at the table here. As we turn our attention to Congress and bring in Kate Ackley of Bloomberg Government. Let's hold on this for a minute, Kate, because we're talking about a lot of moving parts here. That's the backdrop for a potential tax deal that seems to be moving forward. Maybe a snow day here. I don't know how many people are on Capitol Hill, but the Ways and Means Committee was in session for a markup at 9 a.m. Is this going to see the light of day?
It seems like it's on a good path. I mean, it's got a lot of support in the business community. And it has obviously support among Democrats to do this child tax credit expansion. So you've got, yes, there's a lot in there that people don't like. Democrats say it doesn't go enough in terms of expanding the child tax credit. But there's a little bit of something for almost everybody to like and dislike. And maybe that's a recipe for the path forward. A lot of the people who are pushing for this outside of Congress really see this as something that will kind of set the table or set the stage for a much bigger tax bill next year, 2025, when a bunch of things from the 2017 bill are set to expire. So, I had one source tell me just this week that seeing this kind of bipartisan compromise, the two committee chairs, a Senate Democrat and a House Republican, come together and broker a deal that not everyone is happy with, but a lot of people are on board with in a bipartisan way, that this could indicate something into next year, into the big tax talks next year. He described it as a muscle memory on how to do a bipartisan deal. Maybe it could even have ripples into other areas as well.
Yeah, I talked with Jason Smith, the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, and he essentially echoed that this shows that this can be done in a bipartisan way. But he did say too many changes would end up killing the bill, which is maybe why not everyone's going to get what they want in this. Speaking of getting what they want, those leading the impeachment inquiry into President Biden and involve his son Hunter Biden in that, maybe getting what they want from him next month. We got news yesterday on February 28th. Hunter Biden will be appearing for a closed-door deposition, which is what the likes of Jim Jordan and James Comer have been asking for. Where does this go after that?
Well, there was a little bit of concern that the Hunter Biden team wanted to talk in public. And you might think, well, why would he want to do something in public? But it's because of this concern that quotes will leak out, little bits and pieces will come out, and that it could be taken out of context. But somehow, the lawyers all got in a room and brokered this, that he will be doing a deposition, if you will. And so this investigation, I think what we're seeing is like the very tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot going on that affects obviously the administration, Congress, but also there's this whole world of sort of foreign influence that this is touching. We've seen big law firms, lobbying shops file retroactively that they were working for some of the same clients that Hunter Biden was working for. So there could be some ripples here that we're going to be keeping our eye on. How far does this go?
All right, Kate Ackley of Bloomberg Government, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, coming up, we're going to continue our conversation on Congress and this tax deal. We'll hear from Rohit Kumar from PwC on the implications of this legislation. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. Are you confident that it will be the last?
Well, of course I can't say that. I can't say it because people have squandered time so ineffectively over the past few months. This is where we find ourselves. I hope we can get this work done. I know we can. We should be able to do it because we've agreed to the spending levels. We got the spending level that we can live with. Now we want to make sure that we get the policy changes that we want in each of those bills before March 1st.
That was Arkansas Republican Congressman French Hill on Sound On Radio with us yesterday. And we're joined now by someone who knows about negotiations over budgets, Rohit Kumar, principal and co-leader of Washington National Tax Service at PwC and former Deputy Chief of Staff to Senator Mitch McConnell. Rohit, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, we have now had 3 continuing resolutions passed. The new deadline is early March. What is your degree of confidence that they can actually figure out this appropriations process before we're halfway through the fiscal year?
Well, I don't know that they're going to figure everything out before March 1 or March 8, but I think what we have seen now is repeatedly that on a bipartisan, bicameral basis, Congress is not interested in a government shutdown. So even if they can't finish their work by the 1st or the 8th, I think what we know is we will get another sort of additional short-term lease on life while they continue to work it out. And Congressman Hill kind of really hit the nail on the head, I think, in terms of the outstanding issues. It's not so much the funding levels. The funding levels have been agreed to and re-agreed to and re-agreed to. The issue now is what are the policy riders that are going to be attached to this exercise? And having been through several dozen budget negotiations, there are at least a dozen, maybe more, policy fights that have yet to be litigated. And those were avowedly not decided as a part of the overall funding level. So there's still some bumps in the road, but I'm getting more and more bullish that no shutdown is in our future, even if they can't quite finish their work by the first week of March.
Pretty remarkable when you look at the no votes here, Rohit. The conference chair, Elise Stefanik, other members of the leadership, 8 chairs, committee chairs, including the budget chair, Jody Arrington. Even the chair of the admin committee, Brian Stile, voted no. This is not MAGA we're talking about here. These are in many cases mainstream Republicans in the House, and in the case of Stefanik, part of Mike Johnson's team. What does that tell you about the chances of ever seeing a real budget with this Republican conference?
Well, look, at the end of the day, the way that this passed the House last night is the way that bills are going to get signed into law, which is it's going to be something that is bipartisan, down the middle, that unites the middle of the 2 conferences in both the House and the Senate. And, you know, although it was by the hair of his chinny chin chin, he did get a majority of House Republicans of those voting. There were 7 absences, and we don't know how those people would have voted, but there were more Republicans voting for the agreement than not voting for the agreement last night. And, you know, this is sort of harkens back to what we used to refer to as the old Hastert rule, getting a majority of the majority, which is not getting all of the majority, to be clear, even though some have misinterpreted it that way. But getting more than half your conference to vote for something is generally where you want to be as speaker, and he got there last night.
All right, so this was able to pass the full House last night. I also want to get your take, Rohit, on something that was just passed out of the House Ways and Means Committee today, this tax deal that would extend tax breaks for businesses and expand the child tax credit. I actually caught up with the chair of that committee, Jason Smith, the Republican from Missouri, earlier this week ahead of today's markup, and this is how our conversation went. Just take a listen, if you will.
We will have this bill marked up on Friday from the Ways and Means Committee, and hopefully it will be on the floor in no time at all.
Should we expect any changes at that markup, and what might they be?
We have the agreement. Of course, once you came out with the agreement, you have every individual that's asking for their tax provision to be included. And that's exactly what would cause the bill to die.
So Rohit obviously made it out of markup with not all the changes that probably everyone wanted. Will this bill die anyway? Do you think it will have enough support?
I'm actually cautiously optimistic. Look, I mean, this has been going on for 2+ years. Some of these provisions expired in the beginning of 2022. This is perhaps the most significant week in this 2+ year journey. Not only did you have a bipartisan bicameral agreement between the two tax committee chairs, but then you got a 40-3 vote out of the House Ways and Means Committee. And this is not a committee where 40 members generally agree on the direction of tax policy. So that level of bipartisan agreement is there, kudos to Chairman Smith and Chairman Wyden. They seem to have really stuck the landing here in terms of middle of the road. Kate was talking on the earlier segment. There's a little bit of this that everyone's unhappy about, but that's what bipartisanship and compromise looks like.
With that said, could we be in a world where this tax deal becomes law, but we still can't make a budget?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. These are two entirely separate transactions. This tax deal, net is a sort of basically revenue neutral. I think it's like $250 million added to the deficit over the next 10 years, which is the federal government will probably spend $250 million while we're having this conversation. So that's rounding error for the U.S. government. That's a quite different sort of situation than the budget. This thing is actually starts in a much better, more bipartisan location. The House is out of session next week. But I think there's some reason to believe that the House might take this up the week of January 29th when they come back again on the suspension calendar, requiring a 2/3 vote. But again, this is something that got 40 votes out of the House Ways and Means Committee. Every expectation it'll be bipartisan and that it could clear the full House, even if it's subject to a 2/3 requirement.
Well, Rohit, obviously the 29th also marks the beginning of tax season. If it can't be passed by the beginning, how does this complicate the actual matter of filing taxes this year? How much does timing need to be a consideration here?
So they added something after the initial agreement was released and before they marked up the bill today that actually addresses that issue. So part of the compromise here is to expand the child tax credit for calendar year 2023, which means it's going to be reflected on returns that are going to be filed, starting, end of this month and into February in March. And they put in a provision that gives the IRS the authority, if someone files their return before the law is changed and then the law is subsequently enacted and a more generous child tax credit occurs, gives the IRS the authority to sort of adjust the return to reflect the higher credit available, essentially buying themselves some wiggle room because there is no, given that the House is out of session next week, there's just no way this thing becomes law before January 29th. And really what I've been hearing from people who are closer to the service and the way that they process these returns, sort of mid-February is when the sort of refundable credits start really getting attention and process. So, until February 14th, February 15th, this would be a great Valentine's Day gift, I suppose. They've got some wiggle room. And even after that, they've got a little bit of running room. I don't know that there's a magic date beyond which it gets too late to do it. And even if they did it much later in the year, people could always amend their return and get the additional benefit if they were so inclined.
Rohit, it's good to see you. We'll let you lace up your skates now and hope you have a good weekend. Rohit Kumar with us on Bloomberg. Coming up, the latest from the World Economic Forum in Davos. Global leaders weighing in on the prospect of a second term for former President Donald Trump. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. Former President Donald Trump, a popular conversation topic at the World Economic Forum in Davos. ECB President Christine Lagarde and German Finance Minister Christian Lindner weighed in on what a second possible term might mean for America's European allies.
We are talking too much about Donald in Europe, and we should prepare ourselves for a possible second term for Donald Trump by fostering our European competitiveness. Doing our homework is the best preparation for a possible second term of Donald Trump, and this includes our capabilities to defend ourselves, being an attractive partner on eye level when it comes to the economic situation and when it comes to a fair burden sharing under the roof of NATO is the best we can do to be in a good partnership with the United States. And then it doesn't matter which administration, if we are attractive, if we do not have to ask others because we have capabilities ourselves, it's the best way to cooperate. And this is completely for both possible outcomes of the election in the United States, doing our homework.
Madame Lagarde?
I'd love to follow up on what Christian is saying. I think the best defense, if that's the way we want to look at it, is attack. And to attack properly, you need to be strong at home. So being strong means having a strong, deep market, having a real single market, and we should be expecting some suggestions by Enrico Letta, former Prime Minister of Italy, who is in charge of producing this report on how we can deepen and improve the functioning of that single market, which is a huge economic zone in the world, but which is not completely a single market yet, as many CEOs, I'm sure, experience on a daily basis. And we should, more importantly, make sure that the money that is saved in Europe, or the money that is associated with pension, is actually invested in a capital market union that actually functions efficiently to rally the investment that we badly need for the transition towards a greener economy, which relies certainly for a period of time on fossil fuel, but less so, as was indicated in the last COP28, and moves towards renewable, where investment is badly needed.
That was German Finance Minister Christian Lindner and ECB President Christine Lagarde speaking earlier in Davos. And Joe, it was so interesting to me that, and this was not just unique to her conversation she was having today, but Christine Lagarde has been weighing in on U.S. electoral politics.
Yeah,
usually we think about central banks and the monetary policy side of the equation as being completely separate from fiscal policy and the actual politics. And yet, clearly, this is something that these monetary authorities are thinking pretty
Walking it right up to the line there. Remember that line from Joe Biden? He said the first G7, he tells this story a lot in speeches. His first G7, he said, America is back. And the response he got from world leaders was, for how long? And at that point, it really didn't seem so obvious. What now people seem to think is that the inevitable renomination of Donald Trump.
And assuming that Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee, that means an inevitable rematch.
Yeah, here we go again.
Essentially a reliving of the 2020 election.
Why New Hampshire is so important
all over again. Absolutely. And of course, we'll be there to cover it. Coming up, though, here in Washington, we'll be joined by Hagar Chemali. She's a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomics Center. She'll speak with us next about what's happening in the Red Sea as the U.S. and U.K. are looking potentially to ramp up strikes against the Iran-backed Houthis. We'll have her reaction to that news next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
There is continuing skirmishes happening really around the region, not just between the Houthis now and increasingly the United States, but we're also seeing small-scale attacks happening between Hezbollah and the Israelis. We're seeing attacks in Syria and Iraq being carried out directly by the Iranians. The region is continuing to heat up. Both Iran and its proxies are becoming increasingly emboldened at the region.
That was Carmel Arbit, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, talking with us around this time yesterday about the back-and-forth tensions in the Middle East that only seem to continue to heat up. Joining us now is Hagar Chemali, non-resident Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomics Center. Hagar, welcome back. The U.S. and U.K., we now are reporting, are exploring ways to jointly step up their campaign against Houthi rebels in Yemen. Why isn't the initial strategy working? We saw a sixth strike today by U.S. forces, and it doesn't seem to be slowing them down.
No, that's right. But listen, it takes time because what the U.S. is doing and the UK are doing is targeting all the military capabilities of the Houthis. So things like missiles that are poised to be launched to attack vessels, weapons depots, boats, command and control centers, things of this kind. And it takes a long time. Let's remember that for the years that Saudi Arabia was involved in really bombarding the Houthis, they still had difficulty in undermining their military capabilities. Now, again, it's not the same as the U.S. and UK doing it, but that's because the Houthis had driven a lot of it underground, a common theme when it comes with terrorist organizations, by the way. And so it does take time, but the Houthis are not rational actors, and that's a very important point to remember because they're not going to be dissuaded by standard measures of coercion and deterrence such as this kind. And that is why the U.S. and UK are going to continue working to degrade their military capabilities so they just simply can't launch these attacks.
Well, we heard from the National Security Council spokesman John Kirby earlier about the latest strikes against these Houthi targets. Hagar, just take a listen to what he said earlier today.
Morning, U.S. forces conducted 3 successful self-defense strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen. This is the 4th preemptive action that the U.S. military has taken in the past week against Houthi missile launchers that were ready to launch attacks.
So the U.S. describing this as preemptive action. At the same time, the Houthi chief was on televised yesterday, suggesting that the Houthis are now in direct confrontation with the U.S. and UK. And I just wonder, considering this is an Iranian proxy we're talking about here, Hagar, how quickly direct confrontation between the U.S. and UK and a proxy could turn into actual direct confrontation with Iran itself?
Well, as irrational as the Houthis are, at the same time, the Houthis and Iran know that they're no match for the United States and the UK. And so while you're going to see this escalation continue, you're going to see this is obviously a very dangerous zone. It is particularly precarious because a miscalculation could take place. If something were to, if there's a missile attack that, for example, kills a number of Americans, that kills American soldiers, perhaps, then that would escalate in another way. But at the moment, if it continues the way it's been continuing, then I wouldn't expect it to escalate into a full-scale war because you're not seeing deaths of individuals, deaths of soldiers. And Iran knows that. They have their warship station deployed in the Red Sea, but they would much prefer their proxies to carry this out for them. And when John Kirby, for example, when he says that it's successful, what he means is not just the fact that they successfully hit these missiles, but they prevented an attack from happening because they targeted those missiles. And that is really the crux of their strategy in the Red Sea and in Yemen.
What did you think this week, Hagar, when you saw Pakistan enter the fray here? Pakistan and Iran trading fire across their border. How dangerous could that make this existing situation?
You know, what's fascinating about that, I want to divide that into 2. So first on Iran. Iran is behaving particularly bold lately. In general, they're behaving as though they are the regional hegemon of the Middle East by having all of their proxies pursue these strikes, by themselves pursuing strikes in Iraq, which they claim was against the Mossad, and pursuing strikes in Pakistan, which they claimed were counterterrorism related. And both Pakistan and Iraq reacted negatively. Obviously, they both condemned it. Iraq, which is a friend of Iran, called their ambassador back to Iraq, which is a big move over there. But for Pakistan to react, I didn't expect that, to be honest with you. I expected Pakistan to be angry, to say that it was a violation of their sovereignty. I did not expect Pakistan to then to respond with strikes of their own. Now, again, could that escalate into a wider, full-scale war? No. When you're thinking about wider, full-scale war, you really are thinking about something like what you see in Ukraine, what you see in Gaza. At the end of the day, these are going to be attacks that you see in response one to another, tit-for-tat attacks that might escalate further. And I'm impressed that Pakistan responded at all. I think Pakistan did the right thing by responding, by telling Iran that they can't just go behave that way. But I don't expect it to unfold into something catastrophic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if we don't see a full-scale war in the Middle East widely, at least we are seeing pretty clear direct conflict between Israel and Hamas still, and the majority of that fighting still being done in Gaza. And it's raised a question of what happens when if ever that fighting actually is over, the prospect of a two-state solution. And I ask you this knowing that President Biden spoke with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, today for the first time in several weeks. And we heard from John Kirby about the subject of a two-state solution as well earlier today, whether the president still believes in it. Here's what he said.
Still believes in the promise and the possibility of a two-state solution. He recognizes that's going to take a lot of hard work. It's going to take a lot of leadership there in the region, particularly on both sides of the issue. And the United States stands firmly committed to eventually seeing that outcome right now. And we're talking to them actively about post-conflict Gaza and what governance there needs to look like and the importance of an independent Palestinian state for long-term security.
And Hagar, Biden was actually just speaking with some White House reporters and said that when he spoke to Bibi, he was not opposed to all two-state solutions. And when asked if a two-state solution is impossible as long as Bibi is in power, he said, no, it's not. Do you agree?
Well, yes, I can explain what the president was saying here. So first, Prime Minister Netanyahu was known when I was in the U.S. government, when I was at the National Security Council in particular, and I handled Syria and Lebanon during the peace process under President Obama. And so I got some real behind the scenes look at that. Netanyahu was notoriously more flexible privately than he was publicly. And so you're going to have, of course, some public bluster there. And at the same time, also, the whole nation of Israel, including the government, is still reeling from this horrific attack. And so their focus is very much on the war, and they don't really want to know. They don't want to hear about a peace process. They don't want to hear about a two-state solution. Now, Netanyahu himself has never really been in favor of a two-state solution. That doesn't mean that you can't launch a peace process, because when enemies are talking, then they typically aren't fighting. But I think there's a little bit of hope there that Netanyahu might not be there in a few months. A recent poll from the Israel Democracy Institute showed that only 15% of Israelis want Netanyahu to stay on after the war ends. Now, defining when the war ends could be a separate story, but it will transition from high-intensity operations to lower-intensity operations in the next couple months once they have really gotten through Khan Yunis, the Hamas stronghold in the south of Gaza. And if you're looking ahead at potential new leadership, then that is one of the reasons why pursuing a peace process and toward a two-state solution is so important. But it's also a valid effort. It's a worthwhile effort because, number one, I would agree with the administration. It is the only solution. And number two, Secretary Blinken just traveled through the region, and all the regional leaders seem to agree.
Well, we're moving ahead to a two-state solution here, Hagar. We're still not even talking about a truce or a ceasefire to get the hostages out of Gaza. Should that not be next?
Well, it's not that shouldn't be next, but I can tell you, having worked on U.S. foreign policy making at the NSC in particular, it is very common for U.S. foreign policy makers to try and look ahead for two reasons. One, because it can inform the policy that you pursue in the moment. And it can help prepare the groundwork for certain things. If you think of the day after and you think about who's going to govern, who's going to pick up the trash, it helps walk things backwards in a way that can be, it informs your policymaking. But on the other hand, in a situation like this in particular, it also could help limit civilian casualties. It could push the Israelis to just pursuing something lower intensity if they have something else on the horizon that could lead them to a more sustainable solution.
All right, Hagar Chemali, always great to get your perspective, given your experience. Thank you so much for joining us. She is now non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomics Center. Now coming up, we'll turn our eyes back to New Hampshire as former President Trump is gaining momentum in the polls ahead of the first-in-the-nation primary on Tuesday. Can Nikki Haley catch up? We'll be joined with our political panel on that question next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
Oh man, I'm so excited for the announcement tonight. Just tune in, pay attention, listen closely, and let's talk about 4 more years.
Yes, that was Republican Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina standing in front of Trump's plane, and he's expected to endorse Donald Trump at a rally tonight, days before the New Hampshire primary. Joining us now, our political panel, Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. So we're just days out now from the first in the nation primary. Rick, on the one hand, you have the latest Suffolk University Boston Globe poll out today that shows Nikki Haley is 17 points behind Trump. And then the senator that you appointed in your home state endorses that opponent. Are the winds just really blowing against Nikki Haley right now?
Yeah, welcome to running against Donald Trump. You know, it's like running against an incumbent president, you know, to try and steal a nomination. And he has a lot of levers to pull, and he pulled a hard one this time. I mean, this is really burying the opposition, right? I mean, you take your home state senator who you appointed, probably no chance that he could have gotten elected on his own statewide. You elevate him to the United States Senate, very proud of him. He runs against Donald Trump and then decides, you know, that he's going to join up. And if I were Nikki Haley, just hint, hint, I would reproduce that ad and say 4 more years of Joe Biden, because this guy's going to lose to Biden, and that's what you're going to get with this announcement.
Wow.
So, I mean, like, come on, get with the program. This is New Hampshire. It's supposed to be fun.
Well, and it will be, I have no doubt. Kaylee mentioned the latest Suffolk poll. They're doing a daily rolling poll here with the Globe. Jeannie, today, Trump 52, Haley 35. No one else seems to matter here. Ron DeSantis is still stuck at 6. We actually saw Trump pick up a couple and Haley lose a point since yesterday's poll. Does this trend mean something to you as we go into next Tuesday, or could she have a weekend in which she could get a bump here with the amount of campaigning that she's doing?
Well, she is certainly trying, and we should say she is spending double of what Donald Trump is spending from paid advertisements between Wednesday and the primary. She's spending about $4 million. He's doing $2 million. But of course, it's Donald Trump. He hardly needs to spend a dime to just suck up all the media oxygen. And the polls show that. He's got the wind at his back from Iowa. He's got this endorsement. I love the Tim Scott, and, you know, before the plane, and I'm just waiting to see if he's up there wrestling Elise Stefanik and J.D. Vance, said Kristi Noem, so they can all become vice presidential contenders. You know, it is really, really just stacking up in Donald Trump's favor. Nikki Haley has a shot. Certainly, they've got those independents there. But I think Donald Trump is trying to put the nail in the coffin at New Hampshire, wrap this primary season up, and move on to the vice presidential sweeps.
Yeah, Jeannie, I think it's worth a pause of reflection of we have seen one contest in this actual Republican nomination race. It is only this point been Iowa, and yet we already are talking the VP sweepstakes, essentially, and who's going to be the pick when he's ultimately on the ticket. I mean, this is unreal.
It absolutely is. And I keep thinking, and in Iowa, to make it worse, it's only 110,000 people who spoke. And if you think about Donald Trump as an incumbent, at 51%, he didn't do that well. Over 40% of Republicans voted for somebody else. And yet, to your point, Kaylee, this is where we are, and he is, you know, just trying to end this thing in New Hampshire, and he very well could. I mean, she could have a good night and surprise everybody, but the polls would have to be pretty wrong for that to happen at this point.
Interesting watching Nikki Haley in a CNN town hall last evening. This is, you know, closing arguments time, knowing this might be the last chance to get to certain people and deliver a message. When asked about the insults that Donald Trump has been slinging, and it doesn't take long on Truth Social to find them, I will continue to focus on the things that people want to talk about, and I will not get into the name calling, she said. Is it not time to get into the name calling?
No, I don't think she should ever get into the name calling. Part of what people like about her is the lack of chaos, the lack of name calling, the lack of insecurity that Donald Trump has. She's a confident woman who's, you know, pressing her case, and she's being very substantive in the process. And no matter what happens election-wise, she's going to have a lot of dignity at the end of this campaign cycle, which is more than most of their other opponents in the race, and certainly more than Donald Trump's exhibited as he's like edged into racial attacks against her in the course of this campaign. So, look, I mean, this is the trap that Donald Trump sets. In 2016, it was people like Marco Rubio who said, you know what, I'm going to play your game.
Yeah, that didn't go well.
And it destroyed him, you know, and it took a long time for him to get out of that.
So consistency is the point here.
Absolutely. Consistency in maintaining your character in the face of all this really horrible negative attacks.
So maybe the worst we'll hear from Nikki Haley is this idea that Trump was chaotic or brings chaos with him wherever he goes. That seems to be the refrain she's now using when she tries to point at the former president. Whereas Ron DeSantis, who still is in this game in New Hampshire, even if he's not really playing it, he's at least going to be on the ballot has pointed instead to Trump's record, and it seems Ron DeSantis really is trying to run on his record, and now focusing a lot of effort on Nikki Haley's home state of South Carolina. Are we even going to be talking about him after Tuesday?
I'm actually surprised we're talking about him now. He's not playing in New Hampshire, right? He showed up to get some press today, but he's in single digits. He has no organization there. He's no turnout. I mean, like when you play in a primary, you have to have a turnout operation that actually gets people to show up in the polls. He's pulled the plug on everything he had like that in New Hampshire before the Iowa caucuses. So it's kind of like a mirror, right, where you look at it and all you see is Ron DeSantis. There's nothing else behind the mirror. I think one point I would make about Nikki, she's done more than just a little bit. She started attacking Donald Trump on his age. And she started her campaign by talking about, well, anybody over 75, let's give them a test. And you could read that as being all about Joe Biden. But she made a point today, it's also about Donald Trump. And I look at that and say, you started to throw that punch when you announced you should have kept throwing that punch all the way through the campaign.
She hammered home the two 80-year-olds in that town hall. Jeannie, there's a Democrat in New Hampshire. I'm not talking about Joe Biden. It's Dean Phillips. And he has now put $5 million of his own money into his long shot campaign. But wait, there's more. The endorsement of Andrew Yang today has to make a difference. I'm sorry for the sarcasm. What is he doing there?
I've never been sure exactly what he's doing there. Democrats see him as somebody who simply is just out there, has given up his seat, and they cannot figure out why. Joe Biden will be there pretty much only as a write-in candidate, you know, so, and let's be fair, Democrats in New Hampshire are very unhappy with the Democratic Party and Joe Biden for skipping them. I'm still not quite sure why that decision was made just to go to South Carolina first. There'll be no delegates. So it could get a little bit ugly on the Democratic side. But boy, can I just say, hearing Rick Davis say Nikki Haley is going to maintain her dignity sounds pretty much like saying, you know, you lost the game, but you're still a good sportsman. This is not sounding very positive when you think about it from the perspective of Nikki Haley. At least when I listen to Rick, she still maintains her dignity, which is important, but it's not a win.
Well, and Jeannie, it was interesting, Joe, to hear Jeannie mention Democrats' unhappiness with Biden. A lot of people have expressed unhappiness with the president in terms of how the economy is doing in his administration. And yet you see the S&P 500 today, Joe, closed at a record high. He doesn't really flex that stock market like the former president.
Shouldn't he be promoting that right now while he can? Maybe Dean Phillips will. Coming up, we'll continue to look ahead to New Hampshire with our panel. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. 3 days from now, you'll be hearing us as we broadcast live from Manchester, New Hampshire. We'll be in the thick of it, of course, with our political panel. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. They've got their tickets in hands. It will be easier, we like to think, to get to than Iowa was. And interestingly, Rick, it's going to be 40 degrees on primary day. Are we going to set a turnout record?
80 degrees more than the last day.
Yes, exactly.
In Iowa. But I don't hold it against them in Iowa that it's cold. No, I'm really looking forward to New Hampshire. I have a lot of fond memories there. And, you know, it's going to be an interesting campaign. They always surprise you. And so we just haven't really figured out what that surprise is going to be yet.
I love it.
Yeah, well, they say Iowa picks the corn, New Hampshire picks the presidents. Are we going to find out that maybe they both did in 2024, Jeannie?
Oh, we absolutely could, but it's going to be fun. I mean, this is my favorite time of year, and I'm so excited to join all of you there. It is going to be so much fun. It's a great political state. That's their lifeblood in New Hampshire.
Yeah. All right, forget the names right now. Jeannie, how many candidates make it out of New Hampshire?
I think two, but really one that has any possibility. Even if Nikki wins, he's going to use it against her. He's already saying a vote for Nikki is a vote for the Democrats, Biden, and the media elite. So there you go.
2 tickets get punched, Rick?
I guess I'm media elite now. No.
Yeah, we knew that.
Yeah, look, I think they're going to take the game down to South Carolina. I think, you know, Nikki gets a ticket out. She'll show well, better than, you know, anybody expected, you know, a month ago. And I think, little Ron will probably be tagging along just to see what's happening in South Carolina.
Jeez. Is that the new nickname?
I was going to say, don't let Donald Trump hear that one, or we may have a nickname.
What's worse,
on
meatball or, I don't know.
Sanctimonious. There's been many. It's hard. It's
if
hard
you start
to
as a
keep track.
meatball, though, maybe that's a compliment.
Okay, it's time to wrap things up. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, thank you both so much for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you up there in New Hampshire. It's going to be an exciting week, Joe, because it's not just live coverage we'll have from Manchester, but a lot of programming changes coming on Monday. You will now be able to hear this show on radio in addition to watching us on TV.
Looking forward to that as well. And if you want to jump in ahead of time, meet us at 1 p.m. Washington time for what will be an early edition of Balance of Power. We're going to do this every day, starting in New Hampshire, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio. So we've got a lot to look forward to as we serve up the news from the Granite State.
And what a year to do it. It's the 2024 election cycle, and we're here for you. Thank you so much for joining us on Balance of Power. We'll see you on Monday from New Hampshire. Have a great weekend. This is Bloomberg.